Lesson 11. State, a component's memory. 1. Introduction. Let's start by understanding what state really means in React. When components need to change what appears on the screen because of user actions, like typing into a form, moving through an image carousel, or adding something to a shopping cart, they need a way to remember what has happened. In React, this memory inside a component is called state. It allows a component to store and update information that changes over time, like the current input value, which image is being shown, or which products are in the cart. 2. When a regular variable isn't enough. Sometimes, using a normal variable isn't enough for a React component. Imagine a component that displays a list of sculptures, and when the user clicks Next, it should show the following sculpture. If you store the index of the current sculpture in a simple variable and try to update it, nothing happens on screen. Why? 2 main reasons. Regular variables don't persist between renders. When React re-renders, it restarts the component from scratch. Updating a regular variable doesn't tell React to re-render. React doesn't know that something changed. So, to make a change visible on screen, we need 2 things. The data must persist between renders. React must be notified to re-render the component. And that's exactly what state does. React's useState hook provides both persistence and a way to trigger a re-render when data changes. 3. Adding a state variable. To make React remember something, we use the useState hook. Think of it as telling React, hey, I want this component to remember a certain piece of data. When you create a state variable, you also get a special function to update it. This function doesn't just change the value, it tells React to re-render the component with the new data. Each time the component renders, React will give you 2 things back, the current value and the function to update it. 4. Meet your first hook. The term hook refers to special functions in React that start with the word use. They can only be used while React is rendering, and they let your component hook into specific features like state, effects, or context. There are rules about hooks. You must call them at the top level of your component, not inside loops, conditions, or nested functions. Think of hooks as declarations of what your component needs, just like imports at the top of a file. 5. Anatomy of useState. When you call useState, you're essentially asking React to remember a value for you. You give it an initial value, maybe 0, an empty string, or an object, and React keeps track of it between renders. React always returns 2 things. The current value you stored. The function to update that value and trigger a new render. The moment you use that setter function, React updates its internal memory of that value and re-renders your component, showing the new state on screen. It's a continuous loop. The component renders. The user interacts. The state updates. React re-renders with the latest value. 6. Giving a component multiple state variables. A component can have more than one piece of state. You might have one variable to store the current index in a gallery and another one to control whether more details are shown or hidden. If the pieces of state are unrelated, like a number and a toggle, it's better to keep them separate. But if they change together, it might make sense to combine them into one state object. As a rule of thumb, keep your state organized around how you'll use it. For example, for a complex form, it's often cleaner to group all fields into one state object rather than having one per field. 7. State is isolated and private. Each component instance in React has its own isolated state. That means if you render the same component twice, each copy keeps track of its own state separately. Try imagining two copies of the same gallery component on screen. Clicking Next in one won't affect the other, because React treats them as two independent instances with their own memories. This isolation is what makes state different from regular variables declared in a module. They belong to each specific copy of the component on screen. Also, parent components can't directly access or modify the child state. State is fully private to the component that declares it. If you ever need to synchronize state between multiple components, you can lift the state up to their common parent. We'll learn more about that when we discuss sharing state between components later. 8. Recap. Let's summarize the key ideas from this lesson. Use a state variable whenever your component needs to remember information between renders. State variables are created by calling the useState hook. Hooks are special functions that start with use and must be called at the top level of your component. The useState hook gives you two things, the current value and a function to update it. You can have multiple state variables, and React keeps track of them by their order in the code. State is private and isolated to the component where it's defined. Rendering the same component twice creates two separate states. In short, state is how your React components remember and react to user interactions over time.